My name is Sam Peterman. I'm a fairly ordinary 23-year-old musician now, but 10 years earlier, back in June of 2006, something unusual happened that stuck with me throughout high school. It was a warm spring evening on Cape Cod at my senior high school. The annual talent show was underway, and most people were there to watch the senior band, Blue, play their final show together. I wasn't even a freshman yet. I was still in 8th grade. I was part of a band with my friends called Crapshoot, a nickname some seniors had given us after overhearing us rehearse in the band room. While we waited behind the auditorium, I stood next to our bassist, Max Johnson. Max was short and painfully thin, someone I'd known since 6th grade. Despite his awkward frame, girls seemed to gravitate toward him effortlessly. He looked at me nervously about 5 minutes before we were supposed to go on and asked how we were supposed to stand up there. I asked what he meant, but he brushed it off, muttering that it didn't matter. For the previous 2 weeks, we'd been obsessing over this performance. We were all anxious, going back and forth about every detail. The theme of the show was classic rock, meaning every song had to be written before 1990. We chose a Led Zeppelin track because our lineup fit the sound well. After some debate, our drummer, Bob Carter, suggested Whole Lotta Love. It felt manageable since it relied heavily on a steady groove, so that became our pick. Eventually, our band name ZYX was announced, and we made our way onto the stage. Our vice principal, Mr. Mooney, took the microphone and introduced us as a brand new 8th grade band performing a Led Zeppelin classic. I glanced over at Ethan Underwood, our lead singer. He gave a small nod, eyes wide with nerves. There was no turning back. In my head, I kept repeating the motions, sliding to the 7th fret, striking the right string, keeping the rhythm tight. As soon as we started, muscle memory kicked in, and my fear slowly faded. When the chorus arrived, I dragged the pick down the strings the way I'd seen Jimmy Page do in a video. I actually preferred a different live version of the song, but it had been far too complex to master in just a couple of weeks. When the drum break hit the weakest part of the song, I noticed Ethan was clearly enjoying himself. He danced around like an idiot in front of nearly 100 people. That was my cue to add some texture. Without effects to play with, I scraped the pick across the heavier strings of my guitar, trying to create a chaotic, crashing sound. It didn't come out quite as well as it did on my cheap amp at home, but it worked well enough. Then came the guitar solo. I shifted back to the 7th fret as Ethan gestured dramatically in my direction. I jumped in, and the sudden movement drew a noticeable reaction from the crowd. My fingers moved automatically, powered by a week and a half of ignoring homework. Before I could fully process it, the solo ended, we locked back into the groove, and then suddenly the song was finished. I was soaked in sweat from the heat, the lights, and the pressure. The applause came fast, and a few people even stood up. We bowed quickly and rushed off stage, relieved it was over. Max immediately started asking if I thought we'd won. I told him probably not, but maybe we'd placed somewhere near the top. Back in the waiting room, we set our instruments down and stood there quietly, letting the moment sink in. It was our first time ever playing live. Mr. Mooney poked his head in and asked whether we planned to come out and hear the results. We all nodded and hurried back toward the main backstage area. The room was quiet as the announcements continued, and they had just finished naming the winner for the MC category. The principal, Mr. Nelson, stepped up and announced the winner for Best Rock and Roll Band. The crowd clapped, and I glanced at Ethan and Maximum. Both had their eyes squeezed shut, hands clenched tightly. Bob, as usual, looked completely unfazed. The winner, Mr. Nelson announced, was Blue. A wave of disappointment washed over me. The principal went on to praise them, calling them the best band the school had ever seen and complimenting their performance. Max leaned over and muttered something under his breath about the song choice, and I could only shake my head. Then Mr. Nelson announced second place, explaining that each member would receive a small gift certificate as a prize. ZYX was called, and the audience applauded again. We walked up, accepted the papers, and smiled awkwardly. Ethan, overwhelmed by excitement, grabbed the microphone, waved the certificate, and shouted something about us playing a massive venue someday before sprinting off stage. The rest of us followed, laughing. I spotted my mom filming everything and my dad in a Hendrix shirt flashing a peace sign. I muttered for us to keep moving. By around 9 o'clock, we left the school. Our Cape Cod town was quiet and relaxed, and my parents weren't overly strict, so staying out late wasn't unusual for me. That night felt worth celebrating, so the four of us hopped on our bikes and headed downtown. If I had gone straight home instead, none of what came next would have happened. We ended up riding to the football field, the unofficial hangout spot in town. It was far from the school, oddly placed, and not many people questioned why. The beach was an option, but older crowds tended to gather there late at night, and I wanted no part of that. When we arrived, there was already a small group hanging around, mostly kids between 13 and 17, since it was a Friday. Ethan asked if Jim was around. I pointed toward the far end of the field and said I thought I saw him nearby. Jim was an older guy, somewhere in his late teens or early 20s, who always showed up with a cooler full of drinks and snacks. He was Max's cousin, and Max's mom couldn't stand him. We hid our bikes in the bushes and walked over. Jim greeted us with a grin, joking about what we might want and congratulating us on placing second. When I reached for my pocket, he waved it off and said tonight was on him. I thanked him and stepped back. He complained loudly about how authorities never came near the football field, insisting they used to hang out in places like this themselves. We grabbed our cans, sodas and energy drinks and sprinted up the bleachers to the top row. Ethan and Max even balanced along the fence at the edge. I cracked open my drink and warned them they should probably get down before someone slipped and fell. They carefully climbed down and ended up leaning against the fence instead. I commented that I was honestly surprised they actually listened. Ethan grabbed his can and shook it hard, eyes squeezed shut, his arm moving so fast it was almost a blur. I muttered something under my breath, already feeling oddly relieved that it wasn't me doing something that reckless. The rest of us backed away from him. When he finally cracked the can open, foam shot straight up into the air, spraying everywhere. Bob burst out laughing and egged him on, telling him to deal with the mess in the dumbest way possible. Ethan shrugged, leaned in, and immediately regretted it, jerking back and rubbing his nose while trying to wipe the sticky foam off on his sleeve. He complained loudly, clearly uncomfortable. Max, who had backed off earlier, asked if it was safe to come closer again. I told him yes, but also informed him that he'd missed the highlight. A few minutes later, we were all in much better spirits. None of us were really drunk, more just light-headed and overly confident. Under the bleachers, though, things felt very different. We squeezed through the narrow gaps between the seats and spotted a couple of older students clearly not in a good state. Max asked what they were even doing down there. I joked that it looked like something straight out of a bad health class video. Ethan muttered that he recognized the smell from a past family incident, adding that it hadn't gone over well at home. Bob cracked a joke that didn't land quite right and then laughed at it anyway, unable to stop himself. I commented that I hoped no one ended up going home in that condition. Ethan said flatly that they probably would. Then Bob suddenly perked up and told us to watch closely. Before I could react, he grabbed a bottle of lemonade and splashed it downward. I yelled his name in disbelief. The girls below immediately shouted, demanding to know who'd done it. One of them noticed her shirt had been damaged slightly, and both of them took off in a panic, clearly heading to find backup. Max panicked, tossed his empty can over the fence, and took off running. The rest of us followed, sprinting to the far side of the bleachers. When I looked back, though, Bob hadn't moved. He was still leaning dangerously over the gap. I ran back toward him, but it was clear he wasn't fully aware of what was happening. He'd finished the entire bottle on his own, and this was far more than he could handle. He lost his balance and tipped sideways, slipping between the seats and heading straight toward a metal support bar. I never heard the impact. Instead, when I opened my eyes, Bob was suspended midair. I muttered in shock and looked around. Everything had stopped. People were frozen in place. The air felt solid. Even the trees stood perfectly still. Sweat on the athletes' faces nearby looked like it had been turned into glass. Then I noticed movement at the far end of the field. It was Jim. He was smiling, quietly amused, and before I could process what was happening, he started running toward me. His pace looked normal, but he crossed the distance impossibly fast. When he reached me, he calmly told me to sit down. His voice sounded clear and sober, nothing like earlier. I asked what was happening, my head spinning as I took in the frozen world around us. He said it was a fair question and told me he'd explain. He went on to say that he'd been born with an unusual ability. He could stop time within a limited area, no bigger than a square mile. To anyone outside that space, nothing unusual would appear to happen. The pause would last only a fraction of a second to them. But inside it, he and anyone he allowed could move freely. Then he explained there was something else. Another ability, more complex. One he rarely used, but was now passing on to me. He described it as the power to move consciousness from one body to another, rearranging where awareness belonged. He could even do it to himself, swapping places when needed. All it required was focus and repeating a chosen phrase. He said he was giving it to me because he liked me, and because he believed I'd understand it faster than most. I stood there, stunned. After what I'd already witnessed, it didn't feel impossible to believe him. I asked how I was supposed to use this power. He told me I already had it and casually wished me a happy 14th birthday. I pointed out that my birthday had actually been a few days earlier. He shrugged and said close enough. When I asked how it worked, he explained that I just had to focus and repeat a phrase of my choosing. I asked if it could be something completely ridiculous. He said absolutely, mentioning that his own phrase was just as absurd. I smiled and glanced down at Bob, still frozen in midair. I carefully lifted him, surprised by how light he felt. I thanked Jim. He smiled, called me a nickname, and walked away as casually as if nothing strange had happened. I dragged Bob down the bleachers, noticing that time still hadn't restarted. When I reached Max and Ethan, they were frozen in place. The moment I arrived, everything snapped back to normal. They moved again. I hauled Bob up and helped him stumble away, and the four of us ran as fast as we could, putting as much distance between us and the field as possible. We left our bikes hidden in the bushes, planning to retrieve them later. I got home around 10:30 and slipped inside quietly. My mom appeared in the kitchen and asked where I'd been, noting that I usually wasn't out that late. I told her I'd been hanging out at the convenience store with the guys. She accepted the answer and walked into the living room, where my dad was sitting with the newspaper. He looked up and congratulated me on the performance, giving me a thumbs up and telling me I'd done great. I thanked him and went straight to my room, my thoughts racing over everything that had happened. When I woke up, it felt sudden and jarring. I was soaked in sweat. My dreams hadn't been bad, mostly strange and mundane, but my body felt wrong, alternating between hot and cold. I sat up, breathing heavily, and glanced at the digital clock glowing on my nightstand. I groaned when I saw the time. It was only 9 in the morning, and it was Saturday. I'd really thought I'd be able to sleep longer. As I went downstairs, I found my little brother glued to cartoons while my dad sat nearby reading the newspaper. My mom wasn't home, she was probably out picking up groceries. Still half awake, I headed for the fridge when my dad spoke up and said that Max had called earlier and wanted to know if I was free. I asked what he'd told him. He said he'd told Max I wasn't busy and that I could come over after lunch. I nodded and took a long drink of orange juice straight from the bottle. A few hours later, I was biking toward Max's house, riding the same bike I'd hidden in the bushes the night before. As I pedaled, my thoughts drifted back to Jim. I kept telling myself there had to be at least some truth to what he'd said. I couldn't shake the image of frozen time, it had felt too real to be imagined. I considered testing the ability he'd given me, then immediately hesitated. I wasn't exactly eager to experiment on a person. I turned into Max's long driveway, dodging low branches as I rode up. I ditched my bike at the veranda, jogged up the steps, and rang the doorbell. Max answered almost immediately. I asked what the plan was. He said they were thinking about biking down to Bourne, the closest McDonald's, and held up the gift certificates we'd won. He asked if I still had mine. I told him yes and pulled it out from my shoe, where I'd hidden it after the show. We went inside and waited for Ethan and Bob to show up. I followed Max upstairs to his room, where he shut the door and grabbed a controller from beside his bed. He said he just needed to finish up a single-player game. I said that was fine and picked up his old acoustic guitar instead. I was absent-mindedly picking out a melody when Max's sister's cat, Vanilla, wandered in and started rubbing against my leg. I muttered in annoyance and gently pushed the cat away, but it stubbornly came right back. A moment later, Max's retriever padded into the room, chest out like it owned the place. It walked straight up to Max and nudged the controller with its nose. Max laughed and told the dog to wait until later, giving it a pat on the head. That's when an idea hit me. If what Jim said was true, if I really could switch awareness between living beings using that strange phrase, then why not try it on animals first? No real harm, just a test. I shifted back on the bed so I could see both the cat and the dog clearly. Narrowing my eyes, I focused hard and silently repeated my intention, pairing it with the phrase Jim had mentioned. The papers on Max's desk fluttered slightly, as if a breeze had passed through the room. The television flickered for a split second. Both animals swayed, looking disoriented. Then everything went still again. What happened next was unsettling. The dog, now in the cat's body, let out a frightened whimper and scrambled under the bed, trembling. Meanwhile, the cat, now in the dog's body, went completely wild, racing around the room in panic. Max froze, then set his controller down and rushed toward the larger animal, clearly confused. He managed to grab its tail, and it let out a sharp, unfamiliar sound that made him stare in disbelief. I dropped to my knees and reached toward the smaller animal. The moment I touched it, it let out a strange, high-pitched noise that definitely didn't sound like a normal cat. I staggered back, heart pounding. Max finally wrestled the larger animal down as it swiped at him. He kept asking what was wrong with it. That was when it hit me, I had to fix this, immediately. I grabbed the smaller animal, swung it up, and tossed it toward the larger one. They collided and began scrambling over each other, forcing Max to jump back. That gave me my chance. I focused again, squeezing my eyes shut and concentrating as hard as I could on undoing what I'd done. To my relief, the chaos stopped instantly. Both animals bolted out of the room and down the hall. Max stared after them for a moment, then quietly sat back down and returned to his game even though his car had crashed on screen. For the rest of the weekend, I experimented carefully. I practiced switching awareness between different animals, birds and squirrels, a mouse and a cat, even creatures at the shoreline. Each time, I made sure to switch them back. I decided not to try anything involving people until Monday at school. After all, I figured I might as well have a little harmless fun. Monday morning arrived with barely any sleep behind me. I felt drained but wired at the same time. My thoughts raced non-stop, knowing I could step outside and test my abilities whenever I wanted. My mom commented on how fast I was eating breakfast, saying she'd never seen me finish so quickly. I just nodded, grabbed my backpack, and headed for the door. She reminded me that school didn't start for another half hour. I said I wanted to get there early, just in case. I walked down the quiet road, my backpack slung over my shoulder as the occasional car passed by. I took a deep breath, thinking about the long day ahead and wondering who would unknowingly be part of my next experiment. I muttered to myself about starting small. Before school officially began, a lot of the younger students hung out near the front entrance, usually talking about classes or teachers. Occasionally someone would do something mildly rebellious, but nothing extreme. Max was sitting on the bike racks, absorbed in his handheld game. Before I reached him, a few kids recognized me. They told me they'd seen our band perform and said we'd been great, offering high fives. When I finally got to Max, I asked how many people had recognized him. He held up 8 fingers. I joked that we were basically famous now and sat on the rack beside him, pretending to watch his screen. In reality, I was scanning the area for the right opportunity. That's when I saw them. 2 7th graders stood near a parked truck about 20 yards away. The vehicle looked empty, which made the situation perfect. The boys looked similar in age and height, but their builds were different, one lean, the other solid, and they were wearing different shirts. Easy to track. I focused on them, narrowed my eyes, and silently repeated my intention along with the phrase. After about a minute, both boys reacted at the same time, faces twisting in shock. One staggered backward, yelling in disbelief. The other pressed himself against the truck, equally panicked. I smiled. There was no doubt anymore, my ability was real. Max noticed them and asked what was going on. I shrugged and said they were probably just acting strange, then added that I'd go check it out. Max started walking toward them first. I muttered under my breath, realizing what they were about to say. He reached them before I did and asked what was wrong. Both boys shouted at the same time that something impossible had happened. Max paused, then surprised me by asking how. They said they didn't know. That was enough. I knew they were about to explain everything, so I immediately focused and reversed the switch. The boys froze for a moment, then looked down at themselves in relief. But Max wasn't fooled. He pulled me aside and said quietly that he thought they'd been telling the truth. I brushed it off, calling it nonsense. He shook his head and said they'd been completely sincere, pointing out how genuinely upset one of them had been. I asked how something like that could even happen. He admitted he didn't know, then added that he'd once heard a story about the land around the school being cursed. I stared at him. Cursed? Max went on to explain that back in the 1600s, Native Americans cursed this land after a group of white settlers started killing their tribe members. The curse was one of confusion, cast by a powerful chief. I decided to play along, muttering, "Yeah, that sounds about right." He nodded and ran back to the 7th graders. "Wait," I called, rushing toward them. "Keep this secret, all right?" I said, my tone firm. The 7th graders nodded, and Max hesitated. "Shouldn't we tell Bob and Ethan?" he asked. "In time," I said. "We can't rush into things." By then, the 7th graders had gone inside, since school was starting. I sat in homeroom, bored out of my mind, not wanting to switch anyone in front of everyone. I wanted to keep the secret, so I did my math homework, even though I had it last period. We had an assembly on internet safety, and I figured that would be a good time to lay low. When we were dismissed to head to the auditorium, I bolted out of my seat to catch up with Bob, Ethan, and Maximum. We met on the stairs, and they were all talking about Family Guy. "Yeah, man, that was awesome," Ethan said as I approached them. "Hey, Sam, are you going to Nate's party on Friday?" "It's supposed to be amazing," Bob said, raising his eyebrows. "Okay," I muttered. We sat down in the auditorium, me in the center as the lights finally began to dim. An older man walked up to the microphone, and instead of tapping it, he hit it with full force. The crowd went silent, and we all leaned back in our seats as the assembly began. I wasn't paying much attention, though. I was busy scouting for my next targets. "There we go," I muttered. In front of me were a boy from my English class and a girl I only saw occasionally. They were making out, clearly ahead of their time. The girl was on the shorter side, but cute for an 8th grader. She had blonde hair with brown highlights, red manicured nails, and a pretty face. Her body was starting to develop, with a nice tan from head to toe. She was wearing a tight blue tank top and a short white skirt. The boy was tall, extremely muscular, with growing facial hair. He was a fair-skinned Latino, wearing baggy jeans and a loose shirt that looked soaked. His face always gave off the vibe of someone thinking, "Let's get behind the dumpster." I focused hard, squinting until my eyes were nearly shut. The word cooktop screamed in my head while my brain felt ready to crash. Finally, the switch happened. The microphone buzzed, and the lights flickered for a moment as their souls jumped out and into each other. They were dazed for a couple of minutes, but then it hit them. The girl in the boy's body looked wide-eyed and began gasping for air. She grabbed anything she could to keep herself from fainting, but it was no use. She passed out onto the floor, with most people not even noticing. The boy who had been the girl thought he felt something hit his foot, but ignored it and continued scrolling through his iPod. The boy in the girl's body was just as confused. He didn't know what was happening and had a massive headache. He grabbed his head and automatically felt long, curled hair. He traced the strands down to his chest and groped what he found there. Slowly, he realized what was going on. His hand ran down his new flat stomach, until it reached the skirt. He gasped, sliding his hand in, but when he felt a slight bulge instead of his own equipment, he passed out. It was at that moment that everyone noticed. The kids in the row shot up in fear, thinking they might be next. The principal ran over, nearly tripping, and reached the scene, giving the guy on stage a thumbs up. The guy kept talking, but it didn't matter. Everyone was staring at Madison Clancy and Zach Ibsen. I couldn't help but laugh, as evilly as I could, though it sounded kind of pathetic. I stood up with the rest of my row to get a better look. Max pulled me aside and whispered, "I think they switched." "No, they didn't," I lied, trying to look as innocent as possible. The way they both groped themselves and stared at each other, it was just like with those 7th graders. I turned around and looked at the two of them being carried off. "Maybe you're right," I admitted, knowing there was no denying Max had figured it out. "Maybe we should go to the nurse and try to explain my theory to them," he said. "Yeah, sure, and how are we supposed to do that?" I asked. "Just follow my lead," he whispered. "I know what to do." "You watch too many spy movies, man," I said, shaking my head. We ran down the stairs on the side of the stadium seating, trying to get to the doors. Max kicked them open, flooding the room with light. "Shit!" I exclaimed, running down the hallway while everyone tried to get a glimpse of us. "Damn it, Max, this is ridiculous," I shouted, trying to catch up with him. "We might be able to help them," he yelled, taking a sharp left toward the nurse's office. 2 large men were carrying the couple inside. "Hold on a second," I yelled, grabbing his collar. He barely understood why I stopped him, but after a moment, he started to realize the consequences of just rushing in. "So, what are we going to do?" he asked, clearly eager to help the two. "We wait until the muscleheads leave, then we sneak in," I explained. "They're behind closed curtains, and the nurse will eventually leave them alone to get something. We'll grab them and drag them to a soundproof place, like the band room." "But the band room's at least 40 yards away," Max said. So we dragged them. After a while, the 2 men came out and walked toward the lobby. "All right, now we can go," I said. We both ran down the hall and opened the door slowly. I peeked inside to see if the nurse was looking, spotting her at her desk on the phone. We ducked so she couldn't see us from her little platform. Crawling on our stomachs, we made it to the closed curtain. I went under first, and then looked at my 2 targets. I grabbed the real girl and carefully pulled her across the floor, pulling her through the curtain. When I emerged, I nodded at Maximum. He smirked and said, "Figures you'd grab the guy." I pointed at the desk and shushed him sharply. We dragged them across the floor, both of us hoping time would hold, until we reached the door. "Here we go," I muttered, cracking the door open. We slid through the opening and ran down the hall, our arms dragging behind us. "Come on," I yelled, taking a sharp left. Max followed, trying to keep the girl on her back, occasionally glancing down her skirt. I burst open the door to the small music hall and grabbed the handle of one of the practice rooms. We shoved them both inside, Max quickly checking to make sure no one was watching. "Should we wake them up?" Max asked, tapping the real girl on the head. "No," I said. But it was too late. They were both starting to stir. Damn it, I muttered as they woke. Max slammed the door just as the boy in the girl's body yelled, "What the hell is going on?" Madison, now a lot taller, jumped up and tried to make a break for the door. Zach slid to the corner, her skirt creeping up her legs. We watched in stunned silence as Madison started to fall again, looking down at herself and feeling her face. Zach huddled in the corner, eyes glued to the skirt, then to her new private organs. Max tried to grab Madison, ready to make a quick escape, but was punched in the face. "Jesus Christ," he yelled, clutching his nose. I leaped over a chair and tackled him, pulling the new boy to the ground. "Let go of me, you dumb guy," he screamed. Max fell to the floor, holding his nose as blood slowly trickled from it. He was right next to Zach, now rubbing her chest. She appeared to be crying. "Oh shit," he said, moving closer to her. She looked at him, and to Max's surprise, through her tears, there was a smile, completely unexpected in this whole mess. "Why do you look happy?" he asked, shocked. "Because," she said, wiping away her tears, "my whole life, I was fine with being a boy. But if I had the chance to choose again, I'd choose to be a girl. I can't explain it, but I liked how they moved, talked, thought. It's like when a really tomboyish girl wants to be a boy." She smiled, a beautiful smile, wiping the last of the tears off her face. She looked down at herself and cupped her chests. "What about Madison?" I asked her. "I don't know, maybe this is just temporary, but for now, I'm enjoying it," she said, then hugged Max, which both shocked and excited him. "But if I do switch back," she added, "don't tell anyone what I said." As for me, I was in no condition to be excited anytime soon. I'd just been kneed in the nuts so hard that it felt like my eyes were going to pop out of their sockets. "Oh my God," I squeaked. "Holy crap. What the hell is going on?" Madison demanded, kicking me in the chest. I stumbled backward and crashed into a stack of chairs. Max got up from his seat and grabbed a chair. He quickly hurled it at Madison's head, sending her toppling to the ground. "Oh man," I said, "that was wicked awesome." I high-fived him and looked down at the unconscious body. "What do we do now?" Zach asked, now standing up. "1 second, Max said, pulling me aside. He explained that Zach wanted to stay in Madison's body forever, or at least for a while, and that he wasn't sure what to do with the real Madison. "I've got an idea," Zach said from behind us. She walked between us, still holding onto her chests, smiling. "You know, you'll have to let go of those sooner or later," I said. She ignored me. "We could hypnotize him while he's asleep. I saw it online. All we need to do is the procedure, and poof, Madison will think she's always been Zach." "What do we have to do?" I asked her. Madison, now officially Madison, was the one who went out to get the materials. All we needed was some cold water and the hypnotizing wheel from the arts and crafts room down the hall. She came back, closed the door, and told Max to get eye level with Zach, as we now called him. "Okay, Perky," he said, giving Madison's petite backside a squeeze. She giggled, unbothered by it. I rolled my eyes, grabbing the small vial of water. Max tried to clear his mind, practicing the ancient Native American words to put Zach into a trance. Soon, everything was going smoothly. Max was chanting Uta, Juco, Bisa, Ha-ho, and some other gibberish. I controlled the lighting, switching the room from dim to bright with the old-fashioned slide light switch. Madison stood over her former self and dripped water over his head. She also recited the brainwashing command, "You have always been Zachary William Ibsen. You have all of his memories, interests, and attitudes. You are also to break up with your girlfriend, Madison Clancy, at exactly 10:22 a.m. today." The light switched off, and we all inhaled sharply. When it flickered back on, I looked around. Zach was still asleep, and Madison was jumping up and down, giggling in excitement. Her hair bounced with each movement, and everything else seemed to follow suit. She slid her hand up her skirt and let out a cheer, "Kick-ass." "She's very ladylike," I said, glancing at Maximum. His attention was fixed on Madison, a smile spreading across his face. After another minute, I said, "Listen, Perky, we're going to have to leave. I'd say stay here and let him break up with you. You should be able to come up with a believable excuse for being here. I mean, you share the same mind." She nodded and looked at Maximum. Max started walking toward her. "No way," I gasped as they hugged. It wasn't a friendly hug, it was more like a dry hump. They whispered in each other's ears, and Max nodded before walking away, whistling, not even acknowledging my presence. I was going to bring it up, but decided to just let it go. 3 minutes later, we were back in class. We slipped in unnoticed, and the teacher didn't catch us coming in late. I was thankful he was a complete idiot and couldn't see right in front of him with those giant glasses. The class we were sitting in was the longest one of the day, lasting over an hour. It was only broken up into 20-minute sessions. We'd missed gym while we were in the band room. "All right, listen up, kids," the teacher said. "I have something to attend to, so I've got a sub for the rest of the class. She'll be here any second, and she'll be leaving me a note, so don't try anything." A collective sigh of disappointment filled the room. He walked out with his briefcase, and immediately everyone jumped out of their seats. But before anyone could say anything, Ms. Rodriguez walked in. Ms. Rodriguez was a tall, tan woman of Latino descent. Her long brown hair, styled like JLo's, reached down to her waist. She was wearing a white dress with lacing in the back, and 5-inch heels. Her face and upper body reminded me of Eva Longoria, the one Desperate Housewives actress every guy knew. Holy shit, I heard some people whisper. I was one of them. She licked her lips as she sat down at the desk, trying to get the class under control. Even though her entrance had silenced everyone, once she sat down, the chatter started up again. "Damn it," I muttered. I hated it when attractive teachers got upset. They'd get all up in your face, and I couldn't stand that. She seemed overwhelmed, too. You could tell by the look in her eyes she had a migraine. She had just come from the special classroom where she usually taught mentally handicapped children. Our 1B class was no better. I was about to say something to Ethan, who was sitting next to me, but he was fast asleep. The little bastard only ever complained about his grade in English, yet here he was, knocked out. "I bet this is exactly what Ms. Rodriguez wants," I muttered. That gave me an idea. Ethan was known for his bravery. If someone punched him in the face, he'd just keep eating his Captain Crunch, blood dripping from his gums, showing no sign of discomfort. I knew that if he ended up in Ms. Rodriguez's body, he'd be freaked out at first, but he'd quickly take control. I needed to switch them while I had the chance, Ms. Rodriguez rubbing her temple, and Ethan out cold. I kept both of them in my line of sight and whispered as quietly as I could, "Take Sarah Rodriguez's soul and place it in Ethan Underwood's body, and take Ethan Underwood's soul and place it in Sarah Rodriguez's body." Cooktop. The desks shook ever so slightly, and papers rustled as their bodies switched. Sarah, now in Ethan's body, simply smiled and continued dozing in the middle of class. The real Ethan, now in Sarah's body, looked terrified, like a duck about to be shot. He did what was expected, feeling around and looking down at his shirt. His lip quivered for a moment, and I almost switched them back, but then he smiled and pretended to rustle through some papers. "That brave little toaster," I muttered, shaking my head. She stood up, trying to walk in high heels but stumbling left and right. Grabbing papers, Sarah walked back and forth, handing them out to kids she had known for ages. Eventually, she made her way to the back of the room and started muttering to herself. I was right there, ears wide open. "Okay," she said, "how the hell did I just turn into a chick? This doesn't just happen." She grabbed her chests, much larger than Madison's, and rubbed them. "Holy crap, I thought looking at DDs was cool," she said, her eyes wide. The class started to quiet down, the noise losing its charm. All eyes were on Sarah, and she just stared back at them. "I'll be right back," she said. "I'm gonna tell the teacher in the next class over to listen for noise." She didn't do that, though. As the others looked away, I snuck behind her. "What are you gonna do, Ethan?" I whispered. She first went into the ladies' room, kicking the door open. Shit, I muttered. Creeping toward the bathroom, I peered inside. There was only one person in there, Sarah. I crawled in as quietly as I could, slipping underneath one of the stalls. Grabbing the sides, I climbed onto the toilet just enough to see over. Sarah reached around herself and first grabbed her butt. "Oh man," she said, "that's awesome." She then grabbed at her giant jugs and smiled. "I wonder," she said, reaching around and unlacing the dress. It fell to her hips, leaving the whole top half of her body exposed. She yanked the bra off and dropped it to the ground. Her chests then hung free on her chest, and Sarah smiled. "Wouldn't mind spending the weekend in this body," she said. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A 28-year-old woman, who was just a 13-year-old boy, was prancing around the bathroom half unclothed. She tugged on her hair and laughed as it tickled the small of her back. In front of the mirror, she jiggled her chests up and down numerous times, rubbing around the large brown areole. "Bloody A," she yelped, grabbing her empty inner thigh. She tried to strike a pose, lips curled in a tease-like smile, eyes dipped down and hair striping half of her face. She put her hands on her hips and wriggled her eyebrows. Sarah then darted into the stall, to my utter surprise. "Oh," I whispered, getting down. At first all I heard was the gentle sound of fabric sliding down bare legs. I then heard fingers reach through small hairs. Then, all I could hear was moaning and groaning. My eyes went wide, trying to consider the fact that one of my best friends is getting off as a woman. The moans got louder and louder, until she kicked the stall wide open, and let out a huge exhale. At first, there was only silence. Then, the pitter-patter of high heels walking across the tiles filled the bathroom. I once again stood on the toilet to see her every move, and almost laughed as Sarah tried to get the bra on. "It's Velcro," I muttered. She stopped for a second, and looked around to see if anyone was there, and continued on. She then attempted to put her dress back on, since she was now in shoes, bra, and panties. I stood there for another 5 minutes, as Sarah wrestled with the laces. Finally, after a few moments of cursing, she got it back together, and ran out of the bathroom. I quickly followed her, cautious to not be seen by anyone emerging from the girls' room. Back in class, I quickly realized that we'd been gone for a long time. Class was almost over. By now, the kids were all over the place doing absolutely nothing. Sarah sat down at the desk and opened up the lesson plan, and read a single word aloud, improvise. She laughed a little, watching the kids move about. She wrote down, they were very good, and we watched a History Channel special on literature. She figured that that was good enough. Suddenly, I realized that Ethan wouldn't be asleep anymore. "Oh crap," I said. But before I could act, Bob came over and asked me, "Has Ethan been smoking anything lately?" He's been acting a little freaked out. Before he could say anything else, I ran over to where the rest of the band was, and saw the former 20-something hottie talking to Max about the flaws of the Xbox 360. The graphics kick ass, it's just that certain games are kind of bad on it, Max was saying as I went over to them. "Hey, Ethan, you woke up," I said, showing a fake smile. "Yeah," Ethan said, shaking, "but I kind of liked it before I fell asleep. He's been like this since he woke up. You should have seen him then." Max said, "He was out of his mind." I nodded, and looked over at Sarah. She was leaning back in her chair, feet on the desk, listening to music. I walked over to the other corner of the room, and looked over at the clock. Class was almost over, and switching them back seemed appropriate. I went through the same thought procedure, and quickly their faces changed. Sarah's went from a happy, head-banging free-spirited smile to a sudden look of relief. Ethan's expression went from nervous fear to a slight disappointment. He got over it within seconds, though. I decided to walk over to the three of them and looked at Ethan. "Have any dreams?" I asked, in a somewhat playful voice. "Shut up, man, I'm tired," he said. I just nodded, laughing on the inside. I looked back over at Sarah, and she seemed to be ignoring the class. Laughing, I noted class was almost over. For the next day I switched nobody. I had decided to keep it cool, and not to create a mass pandemic sort of thing. But my sense of curiosity got the best of me in last period on Tuesday. There was a boy in our class who had absolutely no friends. Most of us felt sorry for him, but we never really introduced ourselves or helped him. He was always in the back of the class, drawing pictures of the backs of heads. His lonely life wasn't the worst part. He was one of the poorest kids in the school. He got his clothes from other pitiful families and wore them, no matter how torn or stained. Most of us were really nice to him, since he was always on the brink of crying. He kept it all in, though. I caught him one day in 7th grade, sticking a lit match between his fingers and squeezing as hard as he could. I was surprised, and ran over to him. It was then when I learned how crappy his life was. His father had been extremely sick since he was 1, and his mother was lazy and couldn't give a shit about money. She did make them go to church every week, however. I'd always thought a life like that would drive someone to hard substances, but the boy, John Saxon, has gone no further than the horror of self-inflicted wounds. He even said that, despite his family's horrid status, he still loved them, which proved how kind he really was. Even though I knew it would be kind of mean, I asked him, if you could get a brand new life, as a whole other person, with a different family, would you? He glared at me for a second, but replied with a solemn yes. The girl who sat in front of him was the exact opposite. She was 5'6", with curly red hair and the legs of an angel. She had small C-cup chests, sparkling green eyes and a perfect complexion. Her name was Linda Walsh, the most popular girl in the school. Every single boy, no matter how much they denied it, would give their souls for a makeout session with her. She had this giggle, so hoochie-coochie it would drive every male in the class insane. She was only 15, but she looked like a college chick. You might think this girl seemed nice. Sure, she was attractive, but she wasn't the stereotypical blonde princess. She wasn't a princess at all, she was more like a teenage version of Satan. I mean, she didn't burn or kill anyone. She lived in a perfect circle of popular friends, all completely oblivious to the world around them. They could stroll in and out of class without a pass whenever they felt like it. Cutting in the lunch line for them was as easy as cutting paper. The teachers were terrified of them, letting them do whatever they wanted, almost all the time. Linda wasn't the wealthiest in the group. That title went to Johnny Ashburn. But she was still pretty well off. She lived in a seaside 3,100 square foot house with a courtyard and 2 pools. Her wardrobe was filled with designer clothes, $100 shoes, and a tattoo of an apple on her ankle. She owned 1 pair of ridiculously tight jeans, which showed every curve of her lower body. The rest of her bottom clothes consisted of skimpy skirts, all custom made in Finland. The worst part, though, was how she constantly put poor John down. I saw them sitting there, completely ignoring everything around them. She turned around and spat in his face, saying, "Quit breathing so loud." He was about to say something back, but she cut him off. "Don't even think about talking back, I'll have Bill come and deal with you." That wasn't even the worst she'd done to him, trust me. When class ended, I knew exactly what I had to do. I walked over to John and grabbed his shoulder. "What's up, Sam?" he asked, glancing toward the door. "I need to talk to you," I said, looking around. I've got to go. Can it wait until tomorrow? John muttered, starting to walk away. Dude, if you can't talk now, at least call me tonight. I'm in the book. All right, I'll check it out, he said, rolling his eyes and heading out the door. I tried to catch up, but the noise of the hallway was too much for me, so I just ended up walking out the door. Damn it, I muttered, frustrated. I really wanted to help the guy out. I started walking toward the sun, reflecting on the past 2 days. I had just changed a life forever by turning a boy I barely knew into a girl, not even knowing if he would like it. I had also given Ethan and Ms. Rodriguez the wildest 40 minutes of their lives. I didn't know if I was a hero or a villain. I got home around 3 and checked the fridge for leftovers. None, just Tuesday, after all, so I went upstairs to lose myself in a random CD. Here we go, I said, grabbing Dark Side of the Moon. My mom popped her head in the door and asked, "Hey, Sam, how was your day?" "Fine," I said, giving her the standard answer. Just as Breathe was about to start, the phone rang. I grabbed it, since it was right by me, and paused the music. "Hello," I answered. "Hey, man, it's John." "Dude, you called?" "Yeah." I wanted to tell him about my plan but had to ease into it. "Do you hate Linda?" I asked. "I don't want to hate anyone, but if I had to pick someone, it'd be her," he replied. "Remember last year, you told me if you could swap lives with someone, you would? Do you want to get revenge on Linda?" There was a pause on the other line. "Yeah, I guess, but how the hell would that even work? Are we switching bodies or something?" I was relieved I didn't have to bring up the subject myself. "Yes," I said simply. "And how the hell are we supposed to manage that?" John asked, his voice growing irritated. "The school has an Indian curse on it that makes people switch bodies. I've figured out a spot where, as soon as you step into this circle, it will happen." Another long pause. "You're kidding," he said bluntly. "No, I swear this is real." "This is some prank, I'm hanging up," he said. "Ask Megan Clancy," I almost shouted. "Who?" he asked. "The blonde chick in your social studies class," I muttered. "She used to be Zac Ipson this morning." "I swear to you, this isn't a prank." "If this is," John said, "I swear I'll kick your teeth in." After convincing him for another 5 minutes, John finally said, "Fine, I'll switch bodies with Linda Walsh, but how the hell are we going to keep her from flipping out and causing chaos?" "I've got that covered," I said, thinking about how Madison knew about hypnosis. The next day, we met at the back of the school. "So, can you go over the plan one more time?" John asked, looking a little confused. "All right, here's the plan. We get her into the circle, where you'll be waiting. You two will switch, and I'll grab Madison Clancy. We'll knock out your old self and use hypnosis on him. You wanted her to see life through your eyes, right? We can't make her think she's always been you, but we'll make her do and say everything you would do, while keeping her mind intact. She'll feel a strange comfort, but also the horror of being a dude." John grinned slightly, rubbing his hands together. I dashed down the hallway, up the stairs, and into my homeroom where Linda was surrounded by a circle of other girls. I pushed my way through and stood in front of the Irish beauty. "What the hell do you want?" she sneered. "Johnny wants to talk to you," I lied. "It's important." "Why'd he send you?" she retorted. They were standing next to my locker, and it was easy for me to ask. "He wants you in the band room," I said. She shoved past everyone and walked out. The girls resumed talking, and I quickly followed her. I had to get to the room first, so I took the elevator down to the first floor. I raced to the music hall, flung open the door, and ran inside. Hiding behind a couple of tubers, I waited for Linda to arrive. About a minute later, she walked in, her skirt so short I could almost see her panty line. "Welcome to your new life," I muttered. "A life with no rules and no limits." She stormed into the room. It only took half a second for her to exclaim, "This has to be a joke." I jumped up and ran over to the door, peering inside. She wasn't quite inside the chalk circle John had drawn, but it was close enough. I focused on both of them and almost said the word, cooktop. The air shifted again, and they switched bodies. Linda's body stood frozen, clearly in shock, eyes darting left and right. John's body, now with Linda's soul, was anything but still. He began to grab at himself, starting with his chest, then moving down to his inner thigh. He tugged at his new doctor who several times before realizing what had happened. Grabbing the curly black hair John once had, he whimpered before passing out. His head hit the chairs with a loud smack, and the sound of his skull hitting the ground echoed through the room. Linda's body, with John's soul, shuddered when the new John passed out. She raised her manicured nails to her face and touched her smooth cheek. "Jesus," Linda whispered, reaching into her shirt and feeling her chests. Closing her eyes, she muttered, "I can't believe this." She slid her hand up her skirt and grasped the bare skin beneath. After a minute, I asked, "Are you okay?" "I don't know," Linda said, a tear running down her cheek. "I'm split in two." She yanked at her long red hair and shook her head. "You said you could make the real Linda feel kind of comfortable, right?" she asked. "No, but I can get someone who can. Her name is Madison. Can you make me feel a little more comfortable in this body? It's kind of freaky," she asked. "You want me to do that?" I asked, knowing it would be the right thing to do. "Yeah," she whimpered. I stood there for what felt like ages, wondering what she was going through. I can't believe I volunteered to permanently become a girl. "I'm such an idiot," Linda said, tears streaming down her face. Did she say permanently? I thought I had told her this was temporary. I can't tell her that now, I thought. She'd kill me. "I guess I'll go get Madison," I said, turning to leave. It was 10 a.m. I'd missed 3 classes, but I'd called in sick earlier to let them know. I hoped John had done the same. I ran upstairs, dodging teachers as I went. I knew Madison would be in Spanish class on the 2nd floor right now. Tripping up the stairs, I hid behind lockers until the bell rang. After a few minutes of waiting, the bell finally rang, and the students flooded out of the classroom. I sprinted down the hall, looking for Madison. "Where the hell is she?" I muttered, then spotted her. She was standing by the water fountain, talking to her new friend Jessica. A boy's arm was draped around her neck, and that boy was Maximum. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, running up behind them. "All right, Madison, I'll see you at the party when I get back," Jessica said, mentioning her trip to Martha's Vineyard for a couple of days. "And I'll see you tonight," Madison said, giving Max a peck on the cheek before skipping off. "Holy crap," I said to Max, walking up behind him. "Where did that come from?" "She likes being a girl, I guess. I can't believe she already has a boyfriend. She's been a girl for 2 days," I said, watching her walk away, but remembering the task at hand. "Damn it," I muttered. I ran after her, grabbed her golden locks, and yanked them hard. She whipped her head around angrily, but when she saw it was me, she just grinned and shook her head. "And what does the boy want to ask me?" she teased. "You really like being a princess, huh?" I muttered. "I'm not a dude anymore," she replied, hence the skirt and bra. "I'm what you'd call, in your world, a chick." "Well, Miss Clancy, I need you to hypnotize a couple of switched people." She followed me downstairs, asking what was going on. "All I know is that kid we all don't like, John, and that Linda switched bodies. John wants to stay as Linda and wants Linda to stay as him. I get it, but he wants to feel more comfortable, and he doesn't want Linda to ruin everything." "I don't blame him," Madison said, casually peeking down her shirt. "Is that all you've been doing?" I asked her. "No, I taught myself how to strip and have been touching myself all day since Monday." "That's ladylike," I muttered under my breath. We made it to the band room, and I opened the door. Both John and Linda were asleep, curled up on either side of the room. "That's convenient," Madison said, heading for the water fountain to grab a drink. She returned with a cup of water and asked, "Should I braid my hair?" I thought it would look cool. I just shrugged, laughing to myself. If he were a guy, I'd probably be tempted to knock him out. I knelt down to their eye level, and Madison took control of the lights and the commands. Reading from a piece of paper she had kept as a keepsake from math class, we started with the new Linda. I held the arts and crafts pinwheel in my right hand. You've been John Saxon for 14 years, but now you are Linda Walsh. You will feel at home in her body, but you'll remember who you once were, keeping that mental clarity. The light flickered off, then back on. After a few seconds of silence, Madison spoke up. Something's been bothering me. I read online that for this kind of hypnotic command to work, there has to be a strong presence in the room, but it's just you and me. Maybe it's the Indian curse, I lied, trying not to laugh. The new Linda began to stir, feeling her head. Hey, Linda, I asked, are you okay? Yeah, she muttered, I feel better. She looked down at herself and smiled. I feel a lot better. We better get to her, Madison said, trying to rest her cup on her chest, which was now bulging. For the love of God, Madison, how long are you going to? I started, but then I noticed Linda was doing the same thing, with a drumstick. It's fun, isn't it? Madison said. Hell yeah, Linda smiled. 5 minutes later, we were ready to work on John. With 3 people now, I went to handle the lights again. I watched as the 2 girls carried out the hypnotic procedure, and suddenly, I felt a strange sensation in my brain. It felt familiar, like something I had experienced before. Then it hit me. I'd felt this way when we had done this process the last 2 times. The spell seemed to be tapping into my power. Out of curiosity, I tried to switch Linda and Madison, knowing they wouldn't care, but I couldn't. The spell was using my gift. The light flickered off again, and I realized the process was complete. We all exhaled at once. What now? Linda asked. Well, Madison muttered, I skipped gym, your old self called in sick, and so did Mr. Man plus, you have power over all the teachers. What do you mean? Linda asked, confused. You're one of the most popular, prettiest girls in school. You can do pretty much whatever you want, as long as you skip a male teacher's class, Madison explained, sounding a little jealous. We all stood up and headed toward the door. Aren't you going to hold the door for us girls? Madison teased, batting her eyes. I hope you're handy with a baton, because the majorette auditions are coming, I said with an evil laugh. I ran out the back door of the school as soon as we left, dragging John along the road. He was heavier than I expected, and his shirt nearly tore several times as I got him over the sidewalk. His neck probably scraped too, but he'd need that to get used to being a princess. I took him to his street, which was behind the school, and propped him up against a sign. I stomped on his knee, and he jerked awake with a start. Oh my God, he screamed, clutching his leg. Wake up, dumbass. I snapped. Where am I? He asked, trembling. You're on your street. Get going, your house is the green one. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving the former princess sitting near a stop sign. It was only noon, and I had no idea what to do next. I didn't want to get caught out of school, so I decided to head down to the beach. It was just a few blocks away, and I could already see the sandy gravel from a distance. I started running toward it but had to stop when I began to tire and gasp for breath. I was starving. Just raid a picnic basket, I muttered, spotting the sandy dunes near the beach houses. The sand was burning hot, but I didn't feel it with my sneakers on. I stripped off my shirt, tossing it between some rocks, and dove into the cool water. Oh man, I said, floating on the waves, I should be in math right now. The water was eerily calm, but I barely noticed as I drifted, too tired to care. However, I did notice 4 people playing football in the water a few dozen yards away. 2 guys and 2 girls, most likely couples, were tossing the ball around, clearly enjoying themselves. I thought, maybe I'd mess with them a little. Focusing on all 4, I imagined shifting their bodies to the right. Cooktop. They all screamed, running back to the shore. I crept behind them, keeping my distance. 1 guy and 1 girl were just surprised, but they kept their gender and general build. But the other two, the tall brunette and the muscular Portuguese man, were freaking out. The woman was clutching her chest, even though they were small, and grabbing her inner thigh, disturbed by the lack of space down there. The man, though, didn't seem bothered by the muscle at all. The other guy stood there deep in thought, processing what had just happened, not as disturbed as the others. The other woman, though, might have been happy. She was now a stunning black girl, well endowed instead of the plain brunette she had been. I decided to mess with them some more, shifting them all to the right again. Now, the reactions were different since they were all in new bodies. The man who had just been switched with his buddy was now the foxy woman, and the plain brunette was herself again, looking a bit relieved. The man who had just been her was now the other guy. Of course, the foxy woman was now switched with the man who had been in her body. I decided to throw them all into new genders, so I switched the plain brunette and the guy who had just been her. They were now in completely wrong bodies and genders. They all started running around, freaking out, and I almost switched them back, but then I realized I'd forgotten who had been who. Oh shit, I muttered, realizing they might get stuck like this. I didn't want to take too many chances, but I definitely didn't want to push things too far. I also knew I couldn't bring Madison out here. I realized how much I'd just changed these 4 lives. Wait a second, I said out loud, if they're in the wrong gender, then he must wait, and then she must go into him, and wait, hold on, wait. I was so confused, and the headache was starting to set in. Maybe I should try to trick them, I muttered. I came up with a plan, though it wasn't the greatest, but I figured it might work. Grabbing sunglasses and a straw hat to disguise myself, I walked over to the group. What am I going to do? The black girl said, rubbing her flat stomach and tugging at her long hair. You're lucky you're hot, the woman who had been plain said, looking down at her unremarkable body. Hey, screw you, the person who used to own that body shot back. Silence, I commanded in a deep voice, making a circular motion with my arm. Who are you? The muscular man asked, with the hippie-like guy nodding along. I am the spirit of the beach, and I have done this for a reason. You mean you did this, you little mother, the foxy girl began, clenching her fist. I said silence. Now, I'm going to point at each of you, and you will say your former name, then your current name. I first pointed at the hippie guy, who looked down at his feet. Kayla, and now I am Victor, he mumbled. Next, I pointed at the foxy lady. Calvin, and now I am Isabella. I pointed at the muscular man. Isabella, now I'm Calvin. Finally, I pointed at the plain brunette, who said, I was Victor, now I'm Kayla. I tried to figure out if I'd switched the right people, but every time I thought I had the answer, it changed. Deciding to make this an interesting game, at least for me, I said, you'll stay like this for 1 day and report back here tomorrow at exactly 3 o'clock, where I'll switch you back. Got it? Now, I can tell you this, I was not understood. Are you trying to play games with us, Hare? They all yelled, starting to chase me. But I knew I had the upper hand in this little situation, and that's exactly what I used. I stopped, turned around, raised my hand above my head, and whistled. They all froze, and just before Kayla lunged for me, she stopped, moved back, and pretended to fix her bikini top. Isabella cowered behind her, and the 2 guys backed off as well. I could switch you with anyone else in the world, but you're lucky you're a friend. With that, I was gone. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back until I reached the rocks where I'd thrown my shirt. The 4 college kids began walking off, disappearing over the horizon, and I could only shake my head. I hope I can make it back by 3, I muttered to myself. I ran home, trying to figure out who I was becoming. Sitting on my bed, playing the same 4 chords over and over, I remembered Max and Madison were supposed to be going on a date tonight. Knowing Max, they'd probably ride their bikes to the drive-in movie in the next town over. Without a doubt, I had to see it. Since I knew I couldn't go that far alone and that late, I called Ethan to ask if he could come spy on Maximum. He teased me, saying I sounded like a 10-year-old, but agreed. We had to be back by 11 since the next day was a curriculum day, and we didn't have school. I went over to my mom, who was reading a magazine and listening to Pink Floyd, and told her I was going out for a long night. "Can't you just sleep over at Ethan's?" she asked. "No," I said, "I kinda want to sleep here tonight." At 7, I grabbed my bike and rode to Ethan's house. "You ready to see some crazy shit?" I asked him. "Wait, that reminds me," he said, getting off his bike. "You're never gonna believe this, but today I switched bodies with that hot teacher. I swear to God." That's when I decided to let him in on the secret lie. "That means you were affected by the ancient curse. It switches people's bodies." His eyes went wide. "And you know what else?" I continued. "The girl Max is going out with used to be Zac Ibsen, and Max knows it." For a moment, I regretted saying that last part, but Ethan surprised me by saying, "I knew it." "What?" I gasped, shocked. I was gonna ask Max something when I saw him with the blonde. She said something about liking it this way rather than being who she was. We both started cracking up. "So Madison Clancy used to be Zac Ibsen. I remember that guy from English. He always got confused when writing poetry." Ethan kept laughing, and we continued on our way. We reached the drive-in, threw our bikes in the bushes, and snuck past the ticket taker, careful not to step on any twigs. We looked around for Max and Madison, and I saw that they had snuck in as well, taking a secret path on their bikes. "There they are," Ethan muttered. "Yeah, I figured that out a long time ago," I said, stepping onto the tar. In the middle of the theater sat old Benny. Benny was an abandoned car from the 90s, where people without cars usually Saturday. Most of the kids hung out at the snack bar, though. Max and Madison had decided to actually go on a date, not just hang out, so they headed for the Chevy. Ethan and I crept toward the truck and climbed into the back, peering over the edge. I'd always wondered why they never moved this thing, but we stayed quiet and watched the couple. On Sunday, I never would have thought I'd be a perky blonde girl sitting in a car with my boyfriend, Madison giggled, grabbing her chests for the 1000th time. "You really seem to like being a girl, and I mean, really," Max said. "Yeah, and man do these tight jeans feel snug. My pants were falling off." Monday morning. She then curled up and pressed her face to her thighs. "I don't understand, though, how could you just go to liking guys out of the blue, even if you do like being a girl," Max said. Madison pondered this for a second, and then said, "I think it's the sudden dose of estrogen, and this," she said, pointing at her female organs. "Just the sight of her poking and prodding it made Max's heart jump. It's just," she continued, "everything feels so much better. And when I was a guy and liked girls, I always wanted grab something, like you. Now I can do it whenever the hell I want." She then put both hands on her ass, and grinned. "It's just, my dream has finally come true, and I love it," she said. "So have mine," Max muttered. "I'm sitting next to a hot chick who loves touching herself in a car alone." I was stunned, as the movie progressed, to see the two of them move closer and closer to each other. "How long you think the movie is gonna go till it's over?" Ethan whispered. "Half hour," I guessed, though the first Mission Impossible was kind of long, I think. Madison and Max were looking at each other, dopey smiles on their faces. Slowly, Max sank in his seat and Madison moved closer. My eyes went wide when they finally started kissing. Ethan was going to gasp, but he stopped. This obviously hurt, because he coughed. The cough didn't even stop the two of them from going at it. They were making out, and Max made a grab for Madison's chests. He made it, and both hands gripped firmly. He fell back, and Madison ended up falling on him. He then slid one hand down her shirt, arm between chests, touching her belly. The other hand came around and grabbed Madison's butt, and gave it a squeeze. He then took that hand and slid it into her pants, and she started to make sounds from the deepest parts of her throat. "Dude," Ethan said, laughing his ass off in the back. I was lying down in hysterics as well, as the two of them just went at it in the car. "You think Max has had his heart attack yet?" I said. This kind of action, sadly, is quite common among young teenagers, but I never thought I'd see this almost gender thing until real high school. "You think they're gonna go oral?" Ethan said, cracking up. "No way, he'd barf." The noise stopped eventually, and the both of us looked over the window. They had fallen asleep. They were still hugging each other, and Madison's shirt was completely off, thrown out the window. "You think they did the deed?" Ethan said. "No, but I think Max slid into third," I joked. "And you haven't even made it to first, you sorry loser," Ethan quipped, patting me on the back. I brushed his hand off. I honestly have no idea how they could have fallen asleep in such noise. But they managed it. "Should we wake those two up?" Ethan asked. "I guess I could take care of that," I muttered, jumping out of the truck. I kicked the side of the door so hard I could hear the both of them nearly shoot right out of their seats. "What the hell was that?" they both gasped, looking around. Ethan and I booked it. That night, I had a peaceful dream of a quiet lake, with me sitting in a boat. In the distance, on a shore about a mile away, I saw two women and two men angrily yelling at the air. I recognized them as the people I had switched, and remembered my promise. Almost immediately, my alarm clock blared "You Shook Me All Night Long" by AC/DC. It was 2 in the afternoon. I remembered my promise to be back at 3 and knew I had to leave soon, but I was starving. Grabbing a banana, I ran out the door. "Where are you going?" my mom asked, working in our small rose garden. "I'm going for a walk, and happy birthday," I said, remembering her special day just in time. "Be back by 4, okay? Remember, we're going to the 99 for dinner." I ran down the road, watching as the dirt turned to sand beneath my feet. I couldn't help but wonder how John was doing, but every thought about it felt dark and unsettling. Linda must have been having a great time and was probably now good friends with Madison. John and Zach didn't even know each other, but as girls, they were giggling and hanging out like any other pair of friends. With a bandana covering my face and oversized sunglasses on, I walked onto the beach, looking for the group of college kids I had switched. "Where the hell are they?" I muttered to myself. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard Isabella's voice right behind me. "Hey, spirit of the beach," she said, hands on her hips. "Glad you came." "Hello, young man, or should I say young woman now?" I said, extending my hand. "Let me ask you something before I start. Did anything positive come out of what happened to you?" Isabella didn't like the question, but she sneered. I might have gotten a kick out of showering and getting a free drink on ladies' night. I nodded, smiling, and glanced at the others, about 40 feet behind her. I focused on all 4 of them, trying to remember who was who, and switched them all back, crossing my fingers that I'd gotten it right. They all seemed relatively relieved, and the real Isabella, now back in her body, turned to me and said, "Don't let it happen again." She then turned and ran back to her friends, and they quickly left, leaving me to walk off into the afternoon sun. I got home by 1:15, sat in my room, and barely got into Shine On You Crazy Diamond when my dad walked in. "Your brother's in the car, let's go," he said, closing the door behind him. I hit the off button and walked out, a little annoyed at being interrupted. Nothing extraordinary happened the rest of the evening. I almost considered switching my dad with the young waitress at the restaurant, because he kept sneaking glances, which upset my mom. But I decided to let it go. Besides, I didn't want to punish that waitress for bringing me such a delicious rack of ribs, smothered in barbecue sauce and slow-cooked to a tender, melt-off-the-bone perfection. On Friday, I caught up with Bob, who still couldn't remember anything that had happened after the talent show. I told him what I could. "So, did Max really get a hot girlfriend?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Did he use the words steaming hot while describing her?" I asked, laughing. "Yes, he did." "Well, I'll say she's a perky blonde," I stumbled. Bob looked confused for a second but shrugged it off. Max walked over with a goofy grin on his face. "Good morning, noob," he said, snickering. Guess who just made out with a steaming hot little pumpkin pie? Dude, first of all, I said, she was a dude on Monday, and second of all, she's just cute. Jealous, huh? Max teased. Well, I suppose all of us have to grow into full-blown adolescence eventually, but until then, I bid you good day. You can't even spell adolescence. Oh yeah. Max said, adolescence. He went on to tell me how much Madison liked being the blonde girl she was now, and how the sudden dose of estrogen probably had something to do with it. Yeah, I agreed, calming down. After a few days, she should be back to normal. Are you going to that stupid party tonight? He asked, clearly not a fan of Nate Lawrence. I guess, I said, also not a fan of Nate. I just hope he doesn't ask us to play, that would suck. Max shrugged. It's a gig, he said. Next was home economics, a class that was only tolerable because we got to eat something halfway decent every other class. I climbed the stairs to the top floor, where the drafty room was. During the winter, you had to huddle by the stove to stay warm. In the blizzard of '05, the windows finally gave out and blew a foot of snow into the classroom. I walked in and saw Ethan sitting there, even though he wasn't in this class. What are you doing here? I asked, noticing him in one of the chairs in the sewing section. I'm skipping gym, man. I hate how they make you play baseball. It's bullshit, he said, staring out the window. His gym class was stuck playing a soft, ridiculous version of baseball called Z-ball. I sat down next to him, knowing there wasn't much else to do since none of my close friends were in this class. I still can't believe Max, I said, looking around to make sure no one was listening. I can't believe what's going on at this school, especially with the curse that switches people's bodies, sometimes permanently, he said. Yeah, you're lucky you got switched back, I replied, holding back a laugh. The teacher walked into the room, looking frazzled after yelling at some poor student who had been running in the hall. She made her way to the demonstration table, which was almost split in half, one side filled with sewing tools, and the other with a lot of cooking equipment. Above it hung a television used for watching professional cooking demonstrations. Mrs. Mary North, our teacher, shot an annoyed glance at the class and said loudly, "Can everyone gather around for a demonstration on how to make fried dough?" Half of the class moved toward the center, while the rest of us stayed put, paying her no attention. Who cares about fried dough? She repeated herself, this time with more authority. When she spoke again, there was an edge to her voice, and we all reluctantly moved to the center of the room. Now, you all know what a donut is, right? She asked, looking at the class. We all nodded, knowing that staying silent would only make her angrier. After a few minutes of her explaining the history of fried dough and donuts, I couldn't stand it anymore. I decided to daydream instead. In front of me sat a girl named Emily Ross. She was a small, tan girl who looked more like she was 12 than 14. She was what most people would call a late bloomer, but she was catching up. Her brown hair fell just below her shoulders, faintly highlighted with blonde. She wore a snug brown t-shirt, clearly showing she was growing, and tight jeans like Madison's. Her long, painted fingers kept moving up and down her clothes, smoothing out wrinkles. Now, why would I go into such detail about a random girl sitting in front of me? Was it because I had a crush on her? No, not really. I could have spent this time thinking about all the other girls I'd stared at, but Emily was different. In 4 years, I'd take her to prom, but the events that follow have little to do with that. Since I was in a daydream-like state, staring at her sparked my imagination. At that moment, she was my object of affection, so I imagined us standing together in a field full of flowers. I could see us dancing. Of course, I'd had these cheesy fantasies before about other girls, but Emily was sitting right there. In my mind, I could see our souls together, not our bodies. Meanwhile, our teacher kept talking about how to properly fry the dough. Make sure you don't spill any oil on your cooktop, she instructed. I completely ignored most of what she said, but cooktop caught my attention. I thought to myself, cooktop? Don't forget to join me on Patreon for exclusive content.